It's Victory Tuesday here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Your Pittsburgh Steelers came out on top with a 24-17 win. We could talk about the defense. We could talk about Benny Snell, but we got to talk about Kenny Pickett looking poised. We'll talk about that and so much more, what went right and wrong in this game and how the team responded and what it says about their chances moving forward. Again, I'm Chris Carter here of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Tuesday edition of the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things of the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on the video if you enjoyed it. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every week because we're your team every day. Steelers fans, it's Victory Tuesday. And listen, it wasn't pretty, but a win is a win. And I think this is more than a win is a win because this was a game that if the Steelers were really falling apart, if there was nobody that cared, if the team actually was truly devoid of any leadership, of any resilience, of any inner strength, this would have been a game that they fell apart. They take a early lead, 16-3, everything's going right, the game plan's working, and then to open the second half, the Colts get a huge kick return, gives them a short field. They use the momentum. They find a way to get into the end zone. Then the offense comes out, mistakes upon mistakes upon mistakes, back-to-back 3-and-outs, dropped passes, missed blocks, missed opportunities. And then all of a sudden, the Colts are up 17-16, and you're sitting there thinking, oh, gosh, this is it, isn't it? And I got to say, there's a lot of people to point at for their resilience in this game. We're going to get to them. The offensive line deserves points. Benny Snell deserves points. Anthony McFarland, who was called up from the practice squad, deserves points. But all the critique, all the criticisms we throw Kenny Pickett's way, he deserves a lot of credit for this win. 20 of 28, 174 yards, no touchdowns, but his third straight game with no interceptions, and he managed the game well. He managed the field well. He took several smart decisions in this game. There wasn't a pass that I thought was so inaccurately thrown that it was going to be intercepted. There were a couple plays that you wish he had back. There was a touchdown that he missed to George Pickens, but there were also plays that his receivers could have had back for him. George Pickens had a couple drops in this game. Diontae Johnson dropped another touchdown. There were several plays that I thought that the offense was just kind of fumbling around with all the different parts of it that weren't being consistent in this game. But through all of it, Kenny Pickett, back against the wall, showed the competitive spirit that I've been telling y'all exists in that young man's body. I saw it at Pitt, and I'm seeing it here with the Pittsburgh Steelers. You go back and you look at how this game is played out. The Colts have taken a 17-16 lead. Everything's going their way right now. Full momentum in the Colts' favor. The Steelers deliver an 11-play, 75-yard drive with 5 first downs, 8 over 5 minutes of clock. Got the Steelers the lead back and got the 2-point conversion that gave the Steelers a 7-point lead to defend, and the defense did it the rest of the way. They forced a punt on a 3-and-out on the very next drive, and then they did allow some yards on the final drive, but they get the turnover on downs to win the game. This was a gritty win. This was the kind of win that Mike Tomlin, I think, needed to get out of his team in this one. And if he lost this game, there'd be a lot of criticism thrown his way. But these are the wins. I still don't think they're going to get back to a winning record this season. I think that they've dug themselves too deep a hole right now. But it's wins like these why the Steelers haven't had a losing season, is because when everyone thinks that the Steelers are falling apart and there's no chance that this team believes in itself or can find a way to win, they find ways to win these types of games. And Kenny Pickett, being a rookie quarterback, dug deep and found that resilience, found that adversity, found how to overcome that adversity in the moments. Several good reads, several good throws. You go back and I'm looking through how this game was playing out, and you go to the start of the fourth quarter the start of the fourth quarter, and he gets the ball back. He hits George Pickens on a 3rd and 9 for 13 yards while getting hit in the head for a roughing the passer. Made that work. Then the Steelers set back a 2nd and 14. He gets a ball to Diontae Johnson, who gets 8 yards. Should have been more. Diontae Johnson, I felt like, wasn't it hit? He started off hot in this game, but then, had a drop touchdown, had a play where Kenny Pickett hit on a slant. The Steelers had the blocks lined up, and then he doesn't go get the first down. He runs sideways, and it's third down, but Kenny Pickett overcomes that. It's Pat Freiermuth. He gets 17 yards and then is able to that leads to the eventual Benny Snell touchdown. Because on that drive also was the play when Kenny Pickett hit Diontae Johnson in the hands. But then again, he comes back out, fires a 2-point conversion pass right into the hands of George Pickens. It's caught, and the Steelers are able to do it. This is where I've always been on Kenny Pickett, and what I've been saying. This is what you want to see about him this year. He's not going to be the elite quarterback. He's not going to be the guy that puts up 5 touchdowns or 4 touchdowns a game, even 3 touchdowns a game consistently right now. I think he will get there eventually. But this year, you want to see the grit. You want to see the determination. You want to see, hey, you know what? I may not get everything that is happening on this field every play, but I'm gonna be able to take one step at a time and improve my game. And in this game, the Colts were switching up coverages. They were showing 2 high going to 1 high, 1 high going to 2 high. They were trying to confuse him. And for the most part, I think he understood it. He stood in the moment, stood tall, and he did what I've seen Kenny Pickett do so many times at the collegiate level. And I thought that he delivered a really solid game. Also, got to give credit to this offensive line and these running backs. Najee Harris came in, was looking really sharp to start, but then you saw that he was obviously hurt at one point, wasn't able to get any burst, and then his last few runs weren't doing anything, and then they had to take him out of the game because he wasn't coming out, and it was rough. But Benny Snell comes in, Anthony McFarland comes in, they get 92 yards between those guys on 18 carries. Really good showing from them. And I got to say, too, again, we're talking about resilience and bouncing back and how Kenny Pickett bounced back. We got to give the offensive line credit for bouncing back, because early in this game, Dan Moore Jr. was getting whipped. He gave up 2 sacks, was called for a holding penalty, missed a key block on a third down run. He was just looking bad, terrible. And then he picked it up along with the rest of the offensive line. They started blocking as a collective. Mason Cole looking good. James Daniels looking good. Heck, Kevin Dotson. And there were blocks where Dan Moore looked good. And I thought that this team found a way to respond in the toughest of moments. Now, granted, again, Colts, not a good team. They're average to below average. But you have to beat those teams if you want to climb back up to being a contender. And I'm not saying the Steelers are going to be a contender this year, but this is the kind of win that I think you look around in the locker room and you see the guys that helped you win that game, and you look around and you say, you know what? We did something here today. We stepped up. Alex Highsmith, for all the talk about he needs TJ Watt to succeed. He had a huge sack in the final drive of the game that set the Colts back and forced them to have to kind of come back and get a lot of yards. Then he had a big tackle for loss on a third down that set up the fourth down that the Steelers would eventually win on. He had a really good day. Devin Bush, 8 tackles. Minka Fitzpatrick, 7 tackles. A big tackle on a third down. I felt like there were some plays where the defense could have been a bit sharper, and especially in the second half. But the Colts made some really good adjustments. The Steelers adjusted back eventually, but the defense, they played lights out in the first half, and then they didn't defend a short field, and then they gave up 1 real touchdown drive in this game. All in all, I felt they were good. But again, the biggest thing for me, resilience from this team, finding a way to respond even when things weren't going your way. To me, that means a lot, and especially with that resilience coming from Kenny Pickett. We'll talk more about this game in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast and all the factors that played into this big win. But first, we got to talk to you guys about our sponsors at Turo. Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you could book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. Browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the U.S., Canada, or the UK. Book a spacious SUV or a minivan for a family road trip. Get a classic or luxury car for a special event, birthday, or holiday. Find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget and just need to get from point A to point B. Test drive that new electric vehicle you've had your eye on to see how it fits in your everyday life. Many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Ditch boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're here after the 24-17 win over the Indianapolis Colts. The Steelers advanced to 4-7 on the season. It's it's interesting for me to see this Steelers team fight in this way. They came out with a great game plan. The defense was all over the things the Colts were trying to do. They had a breakup on the first pass, an interception on the second pass. They were taking away Jonathan Taylor early. And it's 16-3 at half. You can't complain about a 16-3 lead at the halftime. I mean, granted, you hope that a couple more of those would have turned into touchdowns, but still, that's the pace of the game that you want. And then in the second half, the Colts got a burst on special teams, which we don't often see from the Steelers with their kick coverage. But they get a boost, they get a response, and they were able to get points on the board. And then they had one drive where they were able to capitalize. But the Steelers found ways to find results. And I got to say, this defense, they made an adjustment, and we got to see the snap counts once all is said and done. They're not available because I'm recording this at midnight after the game. But I do believe the Steelers lined up James Pierre on the outside a lot and bumped Cam Sutton to the slot because they wanted to protect Arthur Maulet more. I do think that was an adjustment that they made, and it did seem to work. Granted, James Pierre did give up a touchdown to Michael Pickett. I thought he got pushed off on really badly, but still, I think James Pierre held his own a lot better on the outside than Arthur Maulet would have held up on the inside in the slot on more passing downs. Arthur Maulet, though, did get a sack. And again, they found ways to use him, but it really looked like the game plan said, hey, we're just not going to put him in all of these situations. We're going to make sure we put him in the best situations to succeed. It's not always easy to do that, but they found a way to do it in this game. So kudos to the Steelers for doing that. I thought Larry Ogunjobi, Cam Hayward were doing what they could to disrupt things, but eventually that Colts offensive line did start to figure some things out. Quentin Nelson was blocking well. They were getting some things going, and Jonathan Taylor, being the bad man that he was, there was talks of that guy being in the MVP conversation last year with the way he was running. There's no doubt that he has talent, and it hasn't always been there for the Colts this year, but you saw it start to peek through, especially in that second half with some of the runs he had. He finished the game with 20 carries for 86 yards and a touchdown. But again, the Steelers finding a way to step up in big moments when they needed the stops. They got them. They held the Colts in this game to 3 of 12 on third downs. That's domination in this game. And then vice versa, the Steelers 7 of 14 on third downs. Make no mistake, that's a big part of this win. Even though, again, the Steelers didn't put up a ton of points. Kenny Pickett didn't throw for 4 touchdowns, but going 50% on your third downs, it's things like that made it so that the Steelers only had 2 3-and-outs in this entire game, which if they have more, the Colts get more opportunities to be on the board. They get time to figure things out. They get time to do those type of things. That's where I think the Steelers did a lot of things right in this game. They only had two drives, and they both came in the third quarter where they went 3-and-out. But a 10-play drive to start the game, we got the points. A six-play drive got them 1 first down after that. But then in the second quarter, 3 straight scoring drives. 4 of their first 5 drives went for points. 8 plays, 10 plays, 12 plays. That was exactly how you want things to go. You want to finish with more touchdowns in that situation, but you're figuring things out there. Again, I felt the offensive line was resilient in this game because Dan Moore Jr. was getting whooped really bad, but he stepped up. One thing I thought that was really good about the defense too, they were able to kind of get their matchups early and make them work. And I know that you're going to look back at this game and say, well, Chris, they gave up a 13-point lead. Why do they get any credit? Again, I look back and I say I saw they gave up a short field where the Colts were set up with a kick return. They did give up 1 touchdown drive that was bad, but they stood up a lot. And it's one of those things where if you go back, if you've ever watched the America's Game documentary of the Steelers Super Bowl 43 win after the Steelers defense had given up a touchdown to Larry Fitzgerald, 2 touchdowns to Larry Fitzgerald in the fourth quarter, after a dominant game, Mike Tomlin said it doesn't matter about what happened in those 2 plays. You go out there and you get this last stop, you're a great defense. And I'm not saying that this defense is great right now because certainly that they're not. You could tell TJ Watt's still not 100% back from his pec injury because he's not getting it done all the time. But at the same time, you do see that that they still have skills out there, and you do see that there is production out there. You do see that there's guys that want that fight, that are putting everything out there. And I do think that they still need to go get a number 1 corner. I think they need to get a guy who can take away a wide receiver by himself, let him be your guy that you leave out there on an island so that you can scheme around everyone else because they don't have a guy who could do that right now. And I said that was going to be a problem all throughout the offseason. But this was one of the games that they mitigated that situation. I won't say they took it away because they still gave up a touchdown pass on a fade route. But this was still a game where I felt that the Steelers game plan gave them enough chances to make plays here. And again, there were plenty of plays out there still to be made. There was, George Pickens dropped a big third down where he could have moved the sticks. He dropped up another pass down the sideline where it could have led to a big play. Diontae Johnson dropped a touchdown pass. There were several missed blocks. Dan Moore Jr., his penalty and his allowed sacks on that second drive of the game really stalled the Steelers after James Pierre had gotten them an interception. I mean, imagine in that situation, the Steelers go out and jump out to a 10-point lead instead of a 6-point lead. You're now talking about 20 to 3 instead of 13 to 3 or 16 to 3, and it's a different pace of the ball game. You also give yourself more momentum. And Mike Tomlin said this after the game. Momentum is especially important in a lot of games like this. And I think it's especially important to young teams that are still figuring out who they are. Momentum because is a real thing. And the Colts, they snatched momentum with that kickoff return. If the Steelers had gotten a touchdown early, I think that helps their case. But they had several plays where Dan Moore Jr. was really costing the Steelers, and even by himself. And you can see how sometimes it just takes one guy. And some people were saying, oh, it's the play calling. Oh, it's this. And look, there's times where the play calling is bad. And there were times where, the Colts were saying it's the same plays. But here's my thing. And Mike Tomlin said this in the Tuesday press conference last week. If it's the same plays, why are you giving up all them points? Because they ended up giving up a game-winning touchdown drive to a rookie quarterback on a third and fourth string running back with a makeshift offensive line. So if it was the same plays, they needed to stop him better. But I felt like the biggest problems of this game were execution. And this just comes from not being a good team. You're not consistent. You're not playing the best football this year. You need more talent across the board to kind of stabilize the rest of the roster to make it so that a lot of the role players don't have to do as much to win games. The Steelers, that's who they've been this year. And I think, again, with TJ Watt's injury, it's been a huge setback, and it's kind of put them in a rough spot. But what defines a team in a locker room is how they respond to those tough moments. And early this year, they weren't responding to them too well. I think you've seen in this game, they responded to it well. And last week, there were times where I felt like they responded to it in certain moments, but overall that they came up short. This week, the opposite happened. The Steelers were backed up against the wall. I go back to that drive that they had in the early fourth quarter where Kenny Pickett got them down the field 75 yards, and they finished it with a Benny Snell touchdown run. That was a grit win. That was a Steelers grit moment and a heck of a drive that can be defining for your team to find ways to win, even when most people are counting you out, even when you might be counting yourself out at times, because it's a tough spot. When Najee Harris was said to not be coming out in the second half, I was like, uh-oh, that's a problem. And this team still found a way to win. Again, no turnovers for another game. I think that's big for what the Steelers are doing. And sure, lots of things could be cleaned up in this game. You wanted to finish better in the secondary with how the game played out. You didn't want to give Jonathan Taylor as many yards as he had. You didn't want to have as many drops as you had in this game. But again, if you're gonna go and come out of this, if you're really trying to pretend that the Steelers should have gone to this game and just dominated and been so much of a better team that it was never close, I think you don't understand what this team is going through right now. And even I predicted a 24-10 win, but I also didn't, but I also say that, what, if they don't get that kick, if the Colts don't get that kick return, they lose that, they don't get the 7 points. And it's a 24-10 win for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But I didn't feel like this Steelers team was going to be super dominant. But I did feel like they were going to keep it close and then get a couple points at the end of the game that were going to kind of give them the space to protect their lead. And it didn't go exactly that way. But this is, again, I think this is a very positive win for how this team has been built this year. This team has been built on, has been built on, defense, winning in key situation, winning situational football, running the ball in tough moments, and learning how to run the ball. The offensive line hasn't been consistent this year. Early on this year, they were pass blocking better than they were run blocking. And we've said as the year's gone, that's kind of flipped. But I really look back at this game, and I was going back to some of the big moments and just watching them again on the tape on them, and you see in the run game, guys moving people in key situations and moving them together. It's not just one guy just bullying. It's a unit operating up front that is so big for what the Steelers team needs right now. And again, this offensive line isn't good yet. They still have they still have a lot of work to do. They still need a lot of talent. I think they got to go get some offensive tackles in the draft, a center, a guard, somebody that's going to be. They need two stalwart guys for the future. They're going to be kind of like the flag carriers for the offensive line. But while you're waiting for that to happen in the near future, you need to find answers now. And they found answers in this game that got the run going in key moments. Big time for the Pittsburgh Steelers there. We got more to talk about here on the Locked On Steelers podcast on this Victory Tuesday episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. So don't go anywhere. But first, we got to talk to you guys about Audible. Audible is releasing a new slate of football podcasts that we're sure you're going to love. That's why you'll be able to find The Block Forever available as a bonus episode of Locked On NFL right now. Block Forever is a brand new podcast from former NFL All-Pro Ryan Khalil and Audible. Khalil takes the conversation about football to the next level. He gives football fans an insider's look at the game through the eyes of the greatest players and personalities of all time. New episodes of Block Forever will be recorded and released every week ahead of Thursday Night Football. So head over to Locked On NFL for a sneak peek of Block Forever, or catch the full series available anywhere you get your podcast on Audible. Get in the game. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're recapping the Steelers win here, 24-17 over the Colts. I could get into, a few things. I want to say this about Benny Snell, because I don't think I've emphasized this enough. This is a guy who didn't get a carry all season long, was all but forgotten. Everyone was talking about Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. Hey, I wasn't talking about Benny Snell. He gets in this game because Jaylen Warren's hurt, and then eventually Najee Harris gets hurt, and he needs to kind of be the guy that toasts the rock for the Steelers. There wasn't a complaint. There wasn't he wasn't ready. He was out. He was running hard, making good cuts. This was the best version of Benny Snell football that we've ever seen in a Steelers jersey. 12 carries, 62 yards, and a touchdown. I think that speaks volumes to how he's carried himself, how he's dealt with the adversity in his career, because he was very much an afterthought for a lot of people, and he ran hard in this game. Same thing for Anthony McFarland. 6 carries, 30 yards in this game. His speed was something that people always wanted to tap into. He hadn't had the chance to do too much of that with his early performances for the Pittsburgh Steelers in his career. He was relegated to the practice squad. Jaylen Warren took both of these guys' spots, and in a game where the Steelers had to have them, they came up with 92 rushing yards on 18 carries, and they got a touchdown. Impressive play on their ends as well. I think this speaks to where Mike Tomlin is a great coach. Mike Tomlin isn't the greatest play caller of all time. He's not going to be the guy that dials up the crazy trick play that no one has ever thought before. That's not his strength. What his strength is finding ways to keep guys engaged, to keep guys going in these types of moments when, everyone would have an excuse for Benny Snell to just never care again. You know what? I'm going to collect my paycheck. I'm going to try to make one more, free agent deal with my career, and that'll be that. And I'll just make what I can. But no, he stayed focused. He's obviously been sharpening his craft. We've seen him not run as fast, not run as hard in the hole, and not be able to get upfield. He did in this game. And I think that, again, you look at the defensive side of the ball. James Pierre, he was a guy that last year was getting some reps. Didn't do well in certain games, lost his spot. They signed Levi Wallace, brought back Akella Witherspoon. They kept Cam Sutton. They kept Arthur Maulet. There was very little place for James Pierre, and eventually they even traded for William Jackson III. But he's hung in there, hasn't held his head low, and he's fought back, and he's become a useful asset to this team. And granted, yes, the Steelers need better assets. I'm not saying that they don't. I'm not saying that this team is figured it out and they're going to ride the wave to the Super Bowl or anything like that. What I am saying is that, as I said in my Monday episode, this was a breaking point for the Steelers. It could either break positive or it could break negative, and it broke positive. These are games that Mike Tomlin needs, he's typically in his history when the Steelers have had the chance to kind of say, hey, we're not going to fold. We're going to keep this season alive. We're going to get ourselves to the end of the season. This is why he's never had a losing season. And so many times they've happened. And I was starting to wonder, is this the year where it finally doesn't happen, where the Steelers don't hold the line, where it kind of falls apart and they're going to have to regroup for next year a lot earlier than they do in most seasons? Again, the Steelers, I think there's been one time in the last 17 years or so when they haven't when they haven't had something to play for in the final week of the season. It's been a while, and I think that again, it goes to the commitment that these guys have, even when they're playing poorly. Like Diontae Johnson, you can see he's frustrated with himself. You can see that it's not like he's saying, "Oh, I'm doing fine." It's not like these guys are being lazy. It's that they're trying, and you know what, they aren't good right now at certain things. But if they keep working on it, they can get there. We've seen that with players before on the Pittsburgh Steelers who weren't always the greatest to start things out, but eventually picked up their game. I think Cam Hayward's a prime example of that. He came in and he wasn't a superstar right away, but eventually he became one of the best Steelers defensive linemen that we've seen in this era. Again, I think that this was a big win just for the morale of the team, for a lot of the development of a lot of these young players, especially Kenny Pickett. And when you get wins like this, it's why the Steelers don't fold. It's why they don't tank, because these types of wins are important. Guys are learning from this. Now we got to see what happened with Najee Harris. We got to see what his abdominal injury is, because that could be really scary. That could be season ending if it's the wrong kind of abdominal injury. But before you even get a chance to worry about that, Steelers fans, appreciate this win, because this was a win where your team, they could have folded several spots. They could have gave up. They could have called and said, "You know what, this isn't our year. Let's pack it up." But they didn't. And I also think that especially among that mix is Kenny Pickett. He could have made a lot of excuses for himself. George Pickens dropped this pass. Diontae Johnson dropped that pass. He did not. That's not what Kenny Pickett does. And again, that's why the Steelers liked him, because he carries himself that way. I think that played a huge role in this game, in how they played. They still got a long ways to go to fix things, and they are not by any means out of the woods because they beat the Indianapolis Colts. I mean, they have a short week and they're on the road against the Atlanta Falcons this upcoming weekend. We'll be breaking that game down as the week rolls on as well. But still, with the problems that we've seen that the Steelers have gone through this year, for them to find a way to grit their way to a win, I think is very positive for the direction that this team is going. We'll see how this plays out. I'll have more on the Wednesday episode. Of course, because the game was Monday night, we can't do our grades Tuesday, so I do apologize for the people who are looking for stars and skulls on Tuesday. We will do that on Wednesday, so don't fret, y'all. We will have that episode coming your way this week, where we give you your stars and skulls of the game. I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Thanks so much for checking out the show. We hope you enjoy your Victory Tuesday, Steelers fans. You haven't had a whole lot of Victory Mondays, but you got a Victory Tuesday this week. We'll be back here with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers on the Locked On Steelers podcast that you can find on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. And if you're enjoying this on YouTube, like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes. Again, I'm Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Check out my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'll be back on your screens and in your ears very soon.